Here with Brandon Tamburri, the writer, director, sure producer, and many other things on Plan B. Hey Brandon, how's it going?
Hey, I'm doing really well. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. Um, so uh, I guess this is your first feature, but it's not your first rodeo, so to speak. You've worked on other stuff. What was kind of take us through a quick story that got you to Plan B?
So yeah, absolutely. Growing up, I always wanted to be a filmmaker, wanted to really specifically work in comedy. And right out of college, I got a job working for a bigger production company that had produced a bunch of movies. So while I was working there, I really got to be involved with a bunch of great projects. I'd say most notably was Hereditary, the A24 horror movie. So I was an associate producer on that movie when that came out, which was a great experience. And I also got to, after that, direct and produce some projects for National Lampoon. No, no features, but I did a comedy special, a sketch show, and a few other things. And then after that, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to focus all this effort on my own projects and ventured off to try to get Plan B produced.
What was the seed that spawned Plan B, like the story?
So while I was in college, one of my friends kind of tossed the idea around to me of like a pregnancy movie. It's such a universal theme. So many people deal with it and obviously love it. And kind of just marinated in my head for a few years. And then as I got a little bit older, like in my early to mid 20s, I got to see a bunch of my friends and family members, people in my lives go through pregnancies. And kind of through that process, I just learned like how serious and pregnancy obviously it's a great thing in most cases, but it's also really serious and scary. And there's a lot of like anxieties going on with that. So I just thought like, how could I make something like this funny? And then that's kind of how the idea started. And a lot of my projects, I like to try to take something that's really like a serious matter and just try to put a comedic twist on it.
Yeah, I would say, given the situation in Plan B, I think a lot of people might find that more horrifying than anything.
Yeah, no, it definitely is a a bad situation all around in the movie, um but kind of with the comedic twist, that's really why I tried to bring some light to it and make a funny moment out of a serious situation.
Yeah, and you got a really good cast. Not least of which, Vernon Davis. So I saw him watch a movie of his called Ritual Killer, and he was great in that. And watched this, forgot he was in it until I started. It's like, oh yeah, what? Oh, he was probably the Lamaze guy. Damn, he's good. But it's really great seeing him kind of go from the NFL to acting, and he's kind of crushing it too.
Yeah, Vernon was great to work with. I am a big football fan, grew up being a Vernon Davis fan. So to be able to work with him was awesome. And I think it's just so funny to see him in this comedic role teaching a pregnancy class as a Lamaze instructor. It's just so unexpected. And even since he's transitioned into acting, he has done, like you mentioned, Ritual Killer and a lot of like action movies and things like that. But I think he's super funny, and I hope that there's a lot more comedy in his future.
Yeah, definitely. And then you got Jamie Lee, Jon Heder, Shannon Elizabeth, Tom Berenger, but Michael Lombardi. That took me a second too. I was like, oh, that's Proby from Rescue Me. I'm like, I'm watching this. I'm like, God, that guy looks familiar. Where have I seen him from? But yeah, he's such a different character on this because in Rescue Me, he's getting poked at, and this he's kind of like the handsome stud, which I'm not used to seeing him as a.
Yeah, it really was a totally out of the box role for Michael Lombardi, but he really crushed it. He's so believable in this role as this successful, like handsome, charismatic businessman that you wouldn't really think of him as anything else than that. So like a lot of people see it, and if you haven't seen Rescue Me or some of his other work, you're just totally convinced. And then people like yourself who are fans of Rescue Me and his other work really are like, wow, that's a great role for Michael.
Yeah. And what's it like just kind of do like getting everything together for this movie? How is that different from the roles you played in the past, like as a producer or directing TV and shorts and whatnot?
So this was definitely like a its own beast, I'll say. Kind of, I maybe was a little bit spoiled from working on a project like Hereditary that was kind of like the best possible scenario for an independent film. So for that, it was totally independent and ended up getting into Sundance and premiering and selling to A24 and got a wide release and made a lot of money at the box office. So I kind of saw that and was just thinking like, okay, this is how it works. And then for Plan B, I really did everything. I raised all of the money myself to make it. Pretty much spent an entire year just reaching out to investors and not even investors, just people that I knew, people that were like friends of friends, just trying to get people to try to contribute to the pot of money to be able to finally film this and make it. After it took me a little over a year, I was finally able to get enough money to bring it into production. Then we spent some time casting. After we were funded, I brought a producer on board who helped out with some of the casting. I would give him casting lists and things like that, and then he would reach out to the agents and actually get the actors on board, which was great. That's really how we were able to get such an amazing cast for this. And then we filmed it actually summer of 2022. It was about 2 years ago that we filmed it. It took about a year to actually edit the movie and do the color and sound and all of that stuff. And at this point, the movie has actually been finished for over a year, and it just took a little bit of time to get distribution because we were totally independent. So we needed to first get a sales agent, and then we had to have the sales agent find us a distributor. And then at that point, we had to actually deliver the film, which is a process of a couple months. And then once we actually delivered it, there's this whole other process that we're in now of actually just getting ready for the release. So it's really been a very long time coming. I'm excited to finally have it out into the world for people to see it.
Yeah. And I mean, the movie's coming out, so definitely it's a success in that regard, just getting it finished, which is a mountain to climb. Or like some pitfalls and traps you've fallen into while trying to get Plan B made. So like when you go around for Plan C or whatever your next feature length movie is, you're like, I ain't doing that again. Learn lesson learned.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say for this, at least while we were in the early stages of getting ready to the shoot, I was just wearing way too many hats to the point where I didn't even have as much time as I would have liked to focus on getting ready to direct the movie. I was doing all the location scouts myself. For a little while, I was trying to do all the casting myself. I was just doing so many different things. So I think for the next one, I really would like to have just more of a team early on, like in the pre-production and development phases, to really allow myself just to focus more on the creative because I really was just focused on producing the movie for a while. And then once we did get that money and everything was ready, I was able to get more in the creative headspace. But it definitely would have been helpful to have more of a team around me.
Yeah. And also you mentioned being a producer on Hereditary, and you've had other bunch of producer credits, and I'm always curious because title producer is very nebulous. Like what kind of producer you are. There's like hundreds of different kinds. Like what did you do on Hereditary? And then also how is that different from other things that you've produced? Like how does that job change from uh project
Yeah,
to
so you're
project?
definitely right in terms of so many different roles for what a producer actually is. So on Hereditary, I was an associate producer, and initially I was the assistant to the lead producer on the movie. And just throughout that, I was pretty much doing anything that the two, actually three producers on Hereditary, if there was anything like just important things that needed to get done that they just didn't have time for. Some of it was creative stuff like providing script notes. I was definitely very active in the post-production process in terms of like providing notes on the rough cuts of the films and things like that. But then also random like administrative stuff like opening up like insurance policies and going to the bank and opening up bank accounts. So pretty much like anything that needed to get done that the producer just didn't have time for was assigned to me. And around I'd say so that was kind of my duties on Hereditary. And then on Plan B, I pretty much did everything. Like again, like I mentioned, raise the money. I was kind of the captain of the ship for Plan B. Really just like the person who put the entire project together and was really the lead producer on that.
Yeah. What's some stuff whether being a producer or writer, director, any of these hats, like what are some things that you kind of come across and it's like, oh, I didn't know that was part of the deal. But I do now.
So certainly a lot of things in terms of post-production I wasn't fully aware of. When you're working on a bigger movie, like even though Hereditary was an independent film, it was made for millions of dollars more than Plan B was. So a movie like that pretty much has a specific person on the crew to do each job. But there were definitely times like this where, say for plan B, I needed to like send an export of the film to somebody. And I'm like, okay, well, how do I, obviously I know how to make an export, but like I don't really know the proper settings. I don't really know the proper methods to do things like this. So there are definitely times where I had to either figure out how to do it or I had to just hire somebody on the spot to come in and help me out with something like this because our post-production team was very small. It was really just me and a handful of other people working on it.
Yeah, YouTube's a godsend for stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I did so many things. Really, even like making the budget for this movie. I didn't really have any experience making budgets, and Movie Magic is what I knew everyone in the industry used. So I just went on YouTube, Movie Magic, post some really good tutorial videos on how to use their software. So I pretty much taught myself through YouTube tutorials on how to make a movie budget and a schedule, and they were actually pretty accurate for this.
How does a budget work for something like this? Because I'm completely clueless on that. I'm just like, oh, it's got a budget, blah blah blah. But people seem to be able to find numbers, and that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, so the early budget definitely, I'd say things will fluctuate, like depending on like what you're paying your actors, what you're paying the crew members. But there's kind of some like generic placeholders you can put in, like, okay, it's going to cost, say, like $500 a day to rent out a space. Those could also really vary as well. Like we filmed in New Jersey, which is where I live and grew up. So I had a lot of connections in the area in terms of locations and in terms of crew. So as I'm making the budget, kind of just reaching out to places and saying like, hey, what would it cost to rent out this venue for a day, things like that.
Yeah. Do you ever have to do like a Hail Mary? I imagine you would, but do a Hail Mary pass on something like putting the budget together. I'm gonna guess $3,000 for this, and we'll see what happens. And then day comes and it's 5,000. It's like, oh.
There definitely were some times like that. Like one example I remember for Plan B is that the movie revolves around a pregnancy, and I wanted it to be as authentic as possible. So we do actually do a real ultrasound in this movie, and I had no idea how much it cost to actually rent an ultrasound machine to do that. And it turned out that it wasn't super expensive, but but it was a little bit of money to get that in. But I'm glad we did because again, I wanted it to be authentic, and we've got a real ultrasound. We brought a medical consultant onto this movie just to try to make everything, at least in the hospital, look as real as possible.
Yeah. Like speaking of that, like how do you weigh putting your producer hat on, how do you weigh cost versus the artistic expression? Like when is the cost worth adding it to the movie, and when is the cost like, you know what, we just can't. If we had the money it'd be great, but just it's not going to add anything.
So to me, it really came down to like what the specific scenes were. Like again, something like that with the like a birth scene and an ultrasound. The movie's about a pregnancy. So if you have like a really fake looking birth or a really fake looking ultrasound, to me, that would just really take the audience out of the movie. So something like that was super important. But there definitely were some other times in the movie where I'm like, okay, say if we wanted a location, it was going to be super expensive, and we had another location that might not have been as good, but it was way cheaper. I'm like, you know what? The second location will do. It's worth saving $2,000 on. Like, let's just go with this location.
Yeah. And I mean, you're still in the process of rolling this movie out, and I hope it does well, because I thought this was really fun. Again, we mentioned horrifying in some aspects, but um, do you have any plans yet for your next feature, or are you still in the thick of it and haven't had time to think of anything like that yet?
So I do have a couple other projects, nothing that's really necessarily close to getting made, but I have a couple other scripts that I've written that I'm in the process of trying to pitch to other people. That has kind of slowed down a bit just because I'm really focused on the release of Plan B. But my hope is that people get to see Plan B and then want to see what else I'm working on. And then I do have a couple other scripts ready to go.
Yeah, and this comes out September 27th.
Yep. So this will be out on September 27th on video on demand and all digital platforms. There are some select cities around the US that are playing it in theaters, and there's a couple film festivals as well that are doing promotional screenings as we really get ready for this release on the 27th. But yeah, 27th VOD and all digital platforms like Apple, Amazon, Google Play, Microsoft, really all of those places.
Yeah. What's it like getting a movie like this? Because you figure if you're a Marvel getting it in theaters, just snap your fingers and theaters come running. But with like smaller movies, I've noticed that like they only do select theaters, and it's really hard getting them in there. What's that kind of process like?
So for this, we ended up selling the film to a company called Quiver Distribution, who's the distributor. They're releasing the film. So initially, they were just going to do the digital release and on demand. I really like the idea of just going to a theater. So I had just asked them, like, if I can find any theaters that are willing to play this or any venues, festivals, really whatever it may be, is that okay? And they pretty much said, yeah, go for it. And I really just started calling places. Theaters, again, film festivals that were taking place like in the 2 weeks before the movie came out, and just telling them my story, telling them about the film, and we did get quite a few bites, which is really exciting.
Yeah. Well, you're a workhorse, and movie's great, so you got something good out of it. So congratulations
Yeah,
there.
no, thanks so much. I'm really glad that you enjoyed it.
Yeah. And I guess we'll end with this. I always like to ask people for a movie recommendation. This would be like a kind of a lesser seen movie or something you can shine a light on that this movie's real good and not enough people talk about it.
So in terms of things that I've seen probably within the last like year or so, one movie that I really like that I felt like got some publicity, but not as much as I think it deserves is Blackberry. Really just about the BlackBerry phone. It was just such an interesting story. Like I had no idea about any of this stuff. Great cast. Like Jay Baruchel crushes it. It was just such a good movie. Has some funny scenes as well. And again, some people like heard about this movie. I kind of just randomly came across it on, I think, on demand at one point and rented it, and just like, wow, that was probably the best movie I've seen in a while.
Yeah. Well, Brandon, thanks for joining me. Everyone listening, check out Plan B on September 27th and have a great time. And yeah, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks so much, Eric. Thanks for having me on.